Hello, welcome to the Agora podcast. I am Byron Reese. Cities are kind of what supercharged human advancement. And the reason is because a city is basically a network. If you think of people like nodes, all of a sudden the city, it had a way that all kinds of different people could meet each other and make connections. And that operated like a giant brain in a way. And the place that happened in antiquity was the Agora. When I started this podcast, all I really wanted it to be was fascinating conversations between people, kind of a digital jazz, if you will. And so it's a themeless podcast. I don't talk to people about a topic. We explore ideas and their intersection. Today, I am super excited because we have as a guest Brett Hurt. Brett is one of my very best friends in the entire world and a man I admire tremendously. It would be easy to make his bio his business success because, I respect all entrepreneurs for just being entrepreneurs. But successful ones, they're a rare breed. Twice successful ones, that's amazing. But Brett is somebody who has managed to knock it out of the park 3 times in a row, and he's incredibly young, so he's just getting started. But that really isn't what inspires me and makes me look up to him so much, because I know him so well personally. He is a man who puts his family above everything else. He's always makes time for them. And then when it's not his family, he's always giving back. He's the biggest advocate of Austin, and he's always doing things for the town. He is driven by all of these different charities that he supports, and he supports those. And then he writes and thinks and shares freely with what he knows. He invests in companies in Austin. Like, there's not a sphere I don't find impressive about him. And every time I have a conversation, I don't just learn, but he inspires me. And I appreciate him being here today, and I look forward to our chat.
Welcome to the Agora podcast with Byron Reese, as he talks with great minds about what they're working on, what problems they're solving, and what passions drive them forward. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the show, Brett.
Well, thanks a lot, Byron. Right back at you. I'm sincerely flattered, and this can only go downhill from there with everything you just said. But no, I really appreciate it. You do a lot for Austin, and you're an incredible author, an incredible entrepreneur, and very proud to call you a friend. And our dinners together are some of my most favorite. I know we've got one coming up in a couple of weeks.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Now, I'm going to throw something at you you're not expecting. I'm thinking of writing another AI book. And in my head, the title is just another AI book. And I amuse myself because my goal, of course, is not for it to be one. And I've been thinking a lot about social networks and democracy because I looked at my calendar and by golly, an election's coming up. And I'm kind of, yeah, I know. And I'm not going to rehash all of the things. Everybody knows like how misinformation and all of that. And I've been thinking about like, how do you fix that? And I've been really thinking about the network metaphor. And that's why I opened about cities being networked. So if you think of a social network as a physical network and you're designing a network protocol, like you're Bob Metcalf and you're working on Ethernet or TCP/IP, but probably better, what are the problems that you have to engineer around? And I'm trying to think about like, what are those and how do they engineer around them? Because one problem is you get too much noise. So it has to be error correcting. And it seems our social networks aren't particularly error correcting. And they have to be able to handle a certain amount of noise, static on the line. And maybe ours are being overwhelmed with static. And they have to assume that the actors are good actors, that people aren't maliciously trying to break the network, that the network is robust. You're an engineer at heart. And I'm wondering, when you think about networks and social networks, do you have a solution for the kinds of problems we have? And do you think it is a technical solution like that? Is that a useful way to think about it?
Yeah, this is a really good question. my most recent investment is in a company called Kinship, which is actually trying to solve this problem. It's run by a very, very good friend of mine, Lincoln Brown, and they'll be announcing quite a bit soon. So I'm going to make sure not to spill the beans, but the things there's a couple of things I think about that, and I'm very much wired to be an entrepreneur and an optimist, as you very well know, and I know you're the same. So let me start out with the negative first instead of the positive. So the negative that I think of that you have to engineer around is that we get typecast very quickly in life. And it's really hard to burst out of that bubble and get to ground truth and not stay in the so-called echo chamber. And, one of the worst examples of this is Bernie Madoff. I'm Jewish, American Jewish, and Bernie Madoff really hacked the social network of Jewish people with Elie Wiesel and, a lot of very famous Jewish people to maliciously use that network to take from them with a Ponzi scheme. And it's a very extreme example of an echo chamber and leveraging a social network where people are like, wow, he's Jewish, he must be, really smart, he's getting all these great returns, and, we'd be foolish not to invest. And then the next thing he's a crook and it's a Ponzi scheme. So that's the downside of a echo chamber social network at the most extreme. So from a design perspective, I think about that problem that you just said on how do you get the most diverse viewpoints together from all different fields to really suss out ground truth and how to move forward together, because that is actually how societies form. To make sure that people are working in specialized fields and labor to produce the whole, what you would call the agora, which I think is a beautiful concept. And, somehow society susses that out and figures it out. But in social networks, both in person as well as online, it's far too easy to fall into the trap of saying, well, I'm just going to hang out in my comfort zone. And my daughter, Rachel, gave a TEDx talk a while back and quoted some famous author, I can't remember which one right now, but essentially that there's no growth in the comfort zone. And that is also true of social networks. And so if you're just in an echo chamber, let's say you brought up the election, let's say that, I'm an independent voter, and I'm involved in lots of independent causes that are bipartisan, like APAC and Leadership Now, and all types of amazing organizations, the Henry Crown Fellowship. And if you're the type of person that gets stuck in that bubble, then you're going to, let's say that you only pay attention to Democrats if you're a Democrat, or you only pay attention to Republicans if you're a Republican, then you're going to continue to just reinforce what you think you already know, and you're going to get more and more dug in on that. And the reality is that there's a lot of gray in life, and the truth is usually in the middle. And one of the hardest things to do, I also can't remember who quoted this, but you probably can, Byron, is one of my smartest friends. The old adage that a sign of intelligence is being able to hold two opposing ideas in your mind, and they can both be right. And so, I really force myself to read a very balanced media diet. I force myself out of these bubbles. I force myself, for example, I wrote this in my New Year's letter to friends, that they should feed themselves a media diet of positive newsletters like Future Crunch, The White Pill, The Progress Network. Because if they don't, they're just going to get a 24/7 deluge of negativity. And in a world of 8 billion people, there's always going to be a lot of negative things going on, and that can color their world. And they could think that everything is really in this downward spiral, where the reality is there's amazing breakthroughs happening every day. There's amazing acts of beauty happening every day. You just have to look around you. And if you don't break out of that cycle, then it can really lead to depression. It can lead to this feeling of hopelessness, this feeling of, humanity's bad. And the reality, at least I believe, is that humanity at its core is very good-natured. And if you have two babies, for example, and you put them next to each other, they're not going to just by nature try to kill each other, right? Instead, they're going to kind of be touching each other and, cooing. And it doesn't matter what color they are, what religion their parents came from, or anything else. There's humans, like blank slate. So I would say that's the biggest challenge in designing a network for a city. That I've done my best to design a network in Austin that's very diverse, and great things have come out of that. I'm not going to speak a lot about that publicly, but I'm very proud of what's happened with that and how it's helped people move forward. But I had to do that with a tremendous amount of intentionality in terms of making it very diverse and making sure it doesn't turn into another echo chamber. And that's not easy to do. It's really not easy to do. It's much easier to just invite people that look like me and and are in tech and because that's the majority of things I get invited to. I get invited to mostly things that make me very comfortable.
I'm not so much worried about bubbles as I am. I walk around my neighborhood, and there are all kinds of signs in people's yards, and for different political things. And some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. But I don't bear ill will or malice towards the people in those houses that have ones that I don't. If I saw them pushing their car trying to get out of the mud, I would check the signs first, and before I would help them. I mean, there's a certain amount of common humanity that you just do that. I'm not emotionally vested in their political beliefs, right? But it doesn't feel that way online. It feels like it is actually. And I wonder if it stems from the anonymous internet. If that isn't kind of that you could anonymously browse the internet, that's one thing. But could you imagine an internet where you had to be verified before you could contribute? You had to be you and contribute as you. Because if my neighbors, well, I'll let you ripple that through. What do you think of the nature of the anonymousness of the internet as a source of, and its lack of accountability, therefore? Nobody has to stand behind what they say.
Yeah.
The way I would with my neighbors.
Well, it's very related to what I was just saying about echo chambers. If you're anonymous, then you don't have any type of public scrutiny, and you can just hide behind your computer and put whatever trash you want out there, and not have that feeling of an accountability. You can't do that in a neighborhood because everybody knows where you live, and you want to be a good neighbor. And so the problem with online in relation to this is that everything is just a click away, and it's so easy to traverse from one medium to another. And so why not just stay in a bubble and traverse in mediums that just are constantly reinforcing your worldview, no matter how wrong they actually may be, no matter how bad that echo chamber may be. And it's just very easy to stay in there. Whereas in person, it's not. Like a lot of things that people would say online, they would never say to someone face to face in person. And so that is an anonymousness and anonymity, but it's also just the ease of traversing around without accountability.
Yeah. I also think I put something in the Agora book. I said that I agree with you. Most people are good. We wouldn't have made it this far if we weren't. And I think the actual percentage of people who are evil is 6%. And And it's
That's
an
interesting.
oddly
And if you decide 6%.
it's an oddly specific number, isn't it? And I
Mhm.
get it from this a college kid who was trying to figure out how to help turtles cross a highway. And so he was trying to figure out like the dynamics of that. And he got this rubber turtle and put it on the side of the road. And 6% of people swerved to run it over. 6% of people swerved to run a turtle, an innocent turtle. They don't go around biting people. They're not venomous.
Right,
And so
right.
6%
Yeah.
of people swerved to hit it. And I kind of feel like our problems online are that the 6% are the ones who contribute. And they're across the political spectrum, don't get me wrong.
Right.
And they're the ones that are talking. And so you interject a disproportionate amount of toxicity into it. These very few people are responsible for it. And then you have to say, well, then it really is the algorithm's fault, because the algorithms should learn to filter out the people
Yeah,
who
that's
swerve
for
to run
sure.
over the turtle and
Yeah, I
not.
mean, definitely, enragement equals engagement. And if your primary metric for your business is to drive something like advertising revenue, then you're going to prioritize engagement. And what leads to engagement in social is enragement. So it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way, a self-fulfilling kind of echo chamber in that sense. So you really have to be very intentional to design out of that. And we've seen through studies, of what happened inside of Facebook, for example, that actually when they tried to prioritize, engagement without enragement, that it failed. And that's where, according to these inside sources, which, you never for sure know the truth there, but they got killed, because it was hurting advertising revenue. And, taking that red pill of advertising, if you have a social media network and that's going to be your primary metric of monetization, and it kind of makes intuitive sense because the ads can be more targeted than anything ever before, because you have a good sense of who the people are and what their beliefs are and what they might be interested in shopping for. It does lead to that. But I would also say that just the 24/7 constant access also creates a problem where the fringes are more amplified, because it takes a lot more to stand out in that. And the way our brains are wired for fear, and that just comes from, lots and lots of years of evolution. There is this kind of hit that people get online, by, punching someone and seeing what happens, especially if they're not doing it in person and can get hit back. And so, we really have to design a lot more intentionality into those. Now, I want to be clear, like, ultimately, I think that there's a lot of utopian aspects of social media too. Like, I love the fact that I can stay in touch with people with what's happening in their lives, and it keeps me, connected to a much larger social network than I could if it was just in person. And I do have very meaningful interactions with in person selectively, like the dinners you and I do, for example. And I cherish those. So you can also make time to be in person and be, a full human being in person as well. And actually, social media has helped me have more of those in-person interactions, not less, because it reminds me of something going on in someone's life, could be good or bad, where it really calls for that in-person meeting, in-person dinner, or in-person, call, even, just being able to hear each other's intonation over a telephone is better than just seeing text.
So in my Just Another AI book, obviously a big chunk of it's going to be generative AI. And I remember that when ChatGPT came out, and I think it's fair to say that everybody I know in the AI world was shocked at how good it was. Just out of the blue.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, where did that come from?
Right.
It wasn't necessarily new algorithms. They just finally had enough compute and enough data that they were able to do this.
Yep.
You called me and you said,
I did.
why? And then the open letter, people said, pause all AI experiments.
Yeah. The 6 month
And you were
pause.
like, yeah. And you were like, why do you think they're doing that? And I didn't have a good answer for it. What I said is, well, I guess it's like my book. The fourth H said, there are people who mechanistically view humans. And if you do that, then you are looking for, that at some point we'll build a mechanical human. And what Moore's law says it'll get better and better and better and better. And they think this is the beginning of that. And I still kind of think that, but I think I missed really where all the fear is coming from, because 30,000 people signed that letter, and when you read through them, they're impressive people.
They are.
They're not slack. They're people who have thought these issues through. And I came to a different conclusion, and that is that they have built a machine. I would actually say two things. One of them I'll skip, and that is that I think they overestimate how important cognition is to our daily lives. In other words, 99% of what we do, ChatGPT can't do. It doesn't even aspire to. We don't even put it in that same column. Like you can teach a teenager to drive acceptably well in 20 hours. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars and countless millions of miles, and we haven't been able to teach a computer to do it. So don't ask ChatGPT to drive you anywhere. And don't ask it who you should marry. And don't ask it all these other things. I think very little of our life actually exists in data, like what ChatGPT can do. I think it's just this tiny little sliver. We just kind of go to it mentally. And so I think they overestimate that like, even if it is 1,000 times better, it's only 1,000 times better at this very narrow slice of our very full, complicated existence. But where I'm going with this other side of that coin is that I think it is because they have built a machine and they don't know what it's going to do when they turn it on. That's what I really think. Because when you read the letter, it is unspecific about the fear. It is not specific. And its conclusion, in boldface, so I'm not picking on words here, its conclusion is we shouldn't develop these systems until we are confident they are going to benefit humanity. And the thing
Right.
I've pointed out subsequent to that, and I'm about to stop here, but is there's no invention that could ever pass that test. I'm not even sure the internet, before you turn it on, you couldn't have with the printing press, you couldn't with the internet, you couldn't with air conditioning. And so I think it's because nobody knows what's going to happen. And that frightens people. They build a machine, they don't know what it's going to do. And that's what is frightening to them. What do you think? You've had a time now to digest it. It's been 1 year and 2 months.
Yep.
You and I co-published an article about it. 14 months later, why do you think, give me your read of the situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I just want to acknowledge what you said. I asked you to speak at an event here in Austin, and it was an amazing listen at that time, because if you think about that time, and I'm talking about the time of that 6-month moratorium call, it was a little bit scary to put your neck out there, right? I mean, it's a lot easier to go with the herd and you're like, yeah, this is scary, versus be an optimist about it, especially with the prominence of people, and these are some of the most prominent AI researchers and developers in the world, and they've been doing this almost their entire life, that are coming out so forcefully. But there's lots of examples of innovators throughout history getting it incredibly wrong. And there's many famous stories. Thomas Watson, the world market for computers, I think he said was 6, right? And then he birthed, IBM, and clearly the world market for computers is very, very large, many more than there are people on Earth, because people have multiple of them. A lot of people do. So, where am I at now? I mean, I really went all in with the power of these tools, and I absolutely love them. I agree that there's a lot of things it can't do. It can't make you breakfast, for example. But it can really enhance your productivity in a profound manner. And it can be one of the most fun creativity producing tools you've ever used, maybe the most fun. If you're brainstorming an idea or you're researching a topic, oh my gosh, it's amazing for that, because, that article that we wrote that you and I came out with on November 30th of last year for the 1-year anniversary of ChatGPT. I mean, the amazing thing is it's built on all these layers of technology that came before, including an open internet and all the content that is available to crawl, which of course has made Google's business model and so many others. So it's really good at certain things. It's amazing at helping write certain types of code. One of our best programmers at data.world, he's one of those 10x engineers. In a good year, he would write over 10,000 lines of code. And he's really been leading the charge with our younger engineers as kind of the elder statesman of code writing at our company that everybody looks up to say, hey, in 2 months, I wrote over 18,000 lines of code. That's never happened before in my career. You go back to, whatever period in my life where I was at my absolute most productive, it's never happened. So that's fascinating. And that's just a massive, massive productivity boost. I see our son using it all the time to research anything he's interested in. I see him use it far more than Google. I myself am using it far more than Google at this point. I've got the action button in the new iPhone where that is linked up to ChatGPT. And I feel very Star Trek-like where, I'm having a discussion with my wife, Deborah, and maybe we're disagreeing about a fact about something. And boom, I just press it and I'm like, well, let's ask ChatGPT. And by the way, a lot of times she's right and I'm wrong. So it's really, really handy to have, especially with multimodal. We were in Costa Rica over vacation and just taking photos of things and just testing it out, saying, describe everything in this photo. And with our own eyes, we had missed some things that were going on, and it immediately just broke it down and picked it up. And that's really fascinating. We at data.world went all in internally too, not just for our customers. Our platform was really built for this AI age. We built on a knowledge graph for our customers, and we thought that it would be the ideal format to build basically a digital brain of all of their internal facts, their data, that AI would be able to communicate with, and the brain would be able to correct AI and say, nope, I've got the facts. And we're running all types of really fascinating work through our customers on that with people like WPP and Prologis, and so many other big customers of ours. Power Digital is one that was just speaking on this at CES, and their CEO texted me from CES and said, hey, I'm speaking right now about the work with you guys and Snowflake in this area. And that really made me feel great on behalf of our team. But internally, we're like, let's lead by example with our customers. And so I appointed one of our first employees in the company, Brandon Godochi, to be our VP of AI operations. And he's been systematically going department by department, person by person, saying, where can we really increase productivity? When I was an MBA student, I read a book called The Goal. And the goal is about supply chains and really factories, and where can you identify the Herbie, which is, if you read the book, you'll understand what that is. It's basically, he has this epiphany on a Boy Scouts trip, and Herbie is the slowest of the Boy Scouts. And he figures out that if you put Herbie at the very front of the line, that they will go faster, the throughput will go faster, and they end up achieving their goal, much more dramatically. And so he thinks about that in terms of the factory he has that's failing and figures out how to optimize his Herbies. And we've done that department by department, and it's lifted our internal productivity for the people that use these tools, which a lot of our employees do, by over 25% in a very short period of time. That's real money. You think about a big company, if they did the same thing, if they had a 25% lift in productivity in a few month period, just think about what that would do to their bottom line. Think about what that would do to their top line. Think about what that would do to their employee joy, because now people are getting to do their job in a much more efficient manner. And who wouldn't want to take that path? That's a lot more fun than the drudgery of just going through the work and doing it in a very manual labor type of way when there's another way possible. And so I'm very bullish on these tools. The game that Levi created recently with a custom GPT is really blowing my mind.
Levi being?
Levi is my 14-year-old son, and it's really blowing my mind. It's like the best of choose your own adventure books, if you read those growing up, combined with D&D.
Talk about the game for a minute, if you would.
Sure.
If Levi doesn't have you under non-disclosure.
He definitely doesn't. He wants people to play it. He's all about the people using the technology he produces, just like I am as his dad. And it's so much fun. So think about a fantasy game that's text-based, which is what the original fantasy games were when you and I were growing up as kids. We played things like Zork and, the Ultima games, started to have graphics, but they're still largely textual. And and I created one of the first multi-user dungeons that was called Renegade Outpost. That became one of the most popular games on the internet in the early 90s. And it was super fun. I mean, all the things happened where people got married in real life that met on the game and all of that stuff. Speaking to our earlier conversation about social networks, they had this in common. And so Levi's game is a custom GPT built on top of OpenAI. It puts you in a fantasy world. You can start out in the castle, or you can start out in a town. You select your level of difficulty. He has his hardest mode is called inconceivable mode, but he also has an easy mode. And you go into it, and the more creative you are with the game, you could just follow the game and follow the prompts and just treat it purely like a choose your own adventure, and it would keep you in a very narrow kind of lane. It would still be very fun. And it's illustrated. It uses DALL-E on the back end to draw every scene as you progress in the game. And it's amazing in that sense. I mean, think about that. Think about a choose your own adventure book where any scene you want, just boom, it's going to illustrate it in seconds. That how much more fun that would have been growing up as kids. But the more creative you are with the game, the more fun the game is. And, we've had lots of runs with the game where, the end result is Levi ends up becoming this god that can shape reality, even though he started out as a pauper in a town, right? And there's and that was part of the reason why he started to come out with inconceivable mode, make it a lot harder. But it's really, really fascinating. And it actually, for me, stokes my own level of creativity, because I find out if I'm not being creative enough, the game won't play with me as much. But if I'm being hyper creative and trying to have a lot of fun, then the game kind of responds to that. And it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I could tell you about a run I had recently, which was super funny, or a run Levi had recently, but we can share it in the show notes here. And people should try it out. I mean, it's one of those moments. Like, one of the things, I just gave this talk, Byron, yesterday when I was in San Francisco to a group of shop.org board members over the past 30 years. So I served on that board for 7 years. It's the online division of the National Retail Federation. And I was very proud to serve on that board, and it was super awesome reunion. And they wanted me to speak on AI. And one of the things that I noticed, and I've also heard Ethan Mollick speak about this. He's one of my favorite follows on LinkedIn. He's a professor at Wharton. He's really on the cutting edge when it comes to using AI in the classroom. He's giving wildly ambitious assignments to students. Maybe we can get into what some of those assignments are, but just wildly, wildly ambitious. And one of the things that I noticed is this is the group of people that I grew up with in e-commerce. Like I started Core Metrics and Bazaar Boys, and this is a group that we pioneered together. Like we built the foundations of e-commerce together back when e-commerce was so small that people thought we were all idiots, and like the real sales are happening in the stores and you guys are just tinkering with these things. And we really grew up together as innovators, but yet there were so few of them that really had dove in to really use things like ChatGPT or Google Bard. I mean, really use it. And that surprised me. And I told them, I said, hey, you are the type that were absolutely the vanguards of your industry of retail. You are exactly the type of people that should be diving in and leading the next generation to achieve this inevitable productivity lift that's going to be just expected, or people are going to be, really hurting from a margin perspective versus their competition that does use it very quickly. And so, Levi's game is a way to, in a very fun way, like take your teenager or even 20 kids in their 20s or young adults in their 20s would really enjoy it and actually see what it can do. And the thing that makes it so fascinating to me, and it really blows my mind, is that the game I created on the internet only had a fixed number of worlds that you could go into. It was also a fantasy game. One of the cool things about my game is that people could achieve this level of immortal in my game, and then they could build their own world. So my game was an early form of user-generated content, and that people were building their own worlds. And I was always fascinated by, they'd read Xanth by Piers Anthony and now built a world based on Xanth. And it was super cool, like a new world to explore. With OpenAI, the corpus of content is so large, you could literally play Levi's game every day for 50 years and have a different experience. And it'd all be illustrated in real time throughout the entire time. You want to add a ninja to the game? Boom. Now you've got ninjas in the game. I mean, whatever it is that you can think of, your wildest kind of fantasy in that game can come true. And it's just incredibly fun. And we have to remember that I know that these technologies have been built from a long period of time. And it wasn't like ChatGPT happened overnight. And, at data.world, we get early access to the earlier versions of GPT, and we're using them from OpenAI. So we knew it was going to be a big deal, but we are in the early innings. One of the points I made at shop.org yesterday, as I said, we are in like year one of mobile internet development. And remember, year one of mobile internet development, everything looked horrible. And so the way this is going to advance over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be fascinating. Also, the shop.org meeting I was at was held at Google, and I got to see the latest that's coming out from Google and Gemini. They're in a real arms race with OpenAI right now. It is super existential for Google. That's what I'm saying. They didn't say that. And it is unbelievable, like how they're going to bake Gemini in everything you can imagine, from video to songwriting to ad copy testing to product copy testing to product image testing, every part of the Google suite. And that's going to happen super fast, right? It's the number one development priority that I perceive that Google has. And, of course, AWS just came out with Q in November. And this is a huge priority for them. This is the next frontier of compute and consumption, which drives a lot of revenue. And they're all looking for the next big revenue driver. But the productivity lift is just undeniable at this point. And that's my biggest takeaway since you and I had that conversation. I think it was around in March, which is like, what on earth are people thinking with this moratorium call? And I think at least I concluded from that conversation, way too much dystopian sci-fi, not actually based in the reality of what's actually happening with these tools. And it would be, and what I was thinking when you and I had that conversation is it quite literally be like tribes, of old in the beginning of humanity, like one of them having fire to cook their meals and create bigger brains and everything else, and saying, no, you can't have this. It's like the whole arc of humanity is to get better and better with technology and try to create easier and easier lives. And we've always been wired that way. And I think that's a really beautiful aspect of humanity. So that moratorium call was like, no, you're not going to get the fire. Like that fire's only for us. I'm just like, it was really a wild time. And it's crazy to think about that was less than a year ago, right? Think about how much things have advanced since the moratorium call.
So you haven't said the name of the game or how people can play it. You just
it's called Fantasy Quest Guide.
Fantasy Quest Guide, and how do you play it? Where do you get?
Yeah, so I need to share the URL and show note because one thing I haven't done, which you're now making me realize, because I've been having so much fun playing this game with Levi, is just create a short form URL that redirects to it. Because the Chat GPT kind of custom GPTs that they announced at their only developer day to date, like right before Sam Altman got fired and then rehired, which was a whole nother thing. I wrote this 10 lessons learned on that piece. I read that. LinkedIn. Yeah, wild. But the custom GPTs actually have really long form, really nondescript URLs, so you have to kind of short form it in a way that makes it easy to find. So I'll create that.
So, okay, we'll put it in there. Your game, was early 90s. I'm just going to say it was 1994, and this is 2024. So 30 years. So 30 years from now, Levi will have probably a son, and perhaps we'll make some again. And what is fun to me is to think you can't imagine what it will be in 30 years.
Yeah, that's right.
We couldn't even, anything we say here, when they listen to in 30 years, is going to sound so frozen in our moment, in our viewpoint.
I know. Which I actually love. That's not scary to me at all.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And that, by the way, that really is, I think, the source of a lot of fear is, you've probably heard me say this, if you went back in time to the beginning of the internet and you showed it to people and you asked what it was going to do to jobs, they would have said, well, no more stockbrokers, no more yellow pages, shopping malls, newspapers, mail, all that's going to fall on hard times. And they would have been right about everything. But what nobody would have said was, oh, there'll be Uber and Airbnb and Etsy. And so you always see what it's going to destroy. You never see what it's going to create because you have to use it to figure out what it's going to create. And that's why nobody can escape their own frame of reference. And if we were to try to describe that game in 30 years, it'll just be like a better version of ChatGPT because that's the only thing we can, but it won't. It won't be. It will be something else that we can't imagine yet. And by the way, not linearly, the difference between 94 and 2024 is nothing on the exponential curve between 2024 and 2054.
Oh yeah.
So it'll be like 1,000 years. Yeah.
Right.
What a world. What a world. If you could have been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, would you have taken either of those?
Well, assuming I don't have to give up anything like
Correct.
My family. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would have, I would always opt for later.
That's right. I asked you that already. I think we did a century. Yeah. You always, I'm an optimist. I write optimistic books about the future, but I don't come by it reflexive. Like I read a quote from Gene Roddenberry where he said, in the future, there'll be no hunger, there'll be no greed, and all the children will know how to read. And I didn't know if I agreed with that. And I didn't know what I thought about the future. And that's why I wrote my first book, Infinite Progress. Spoiler, the title is a spoiler.
Great book.
So I have to kind of thank you. I have to keep reaffirming my optimism because it isn't just like a given. And every time I talk to you, it does that. It supercharges it again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. It's just so exciting to breathe our air of the moment. Of course, we have all the challenges we should
Of course.
put. There's a lot of people left
And
out
there
of this
always have
world.
been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who don't have access to this world, and a lot of people who will find the transition difficult. And being an optimist doesn't mean you're blind to the downside, but that you think the upside is going to outweigh it and will mitigate it.
Yeah. I mean, there's always bad uses of all new technology. I mean, that is true. Like there will be lots of, fake content created through AI, fake images, fake videos like that. But the thing that people don't think about is all of the counter initiatives that will also be powered by AI for that. And so that'll also happen. But yeah, I do think there's a bit of a litmus test. Like one thing that I was thinking a lot about in Costa Rica on our vacation, and I was talking with Levi about this. I just love talking with him about any of these topics because the access he has is so incredible. Like he's watched every TED Ed video. He did that years ago. Every In a Nutshell video on YouTube. Now he's just constantly learning through ChatGPT. He has watched every Lex Friedman podcast on AI. Now he's consuming all the TED AI talks that TED did their first AI event last year. There's one that just went live by one of the senior executives at NVIDIA that's really pretty mind-blowing. That just went live yesterday on what they're calling the foundational model, which is a model which simulates reality. And so I encourage everybody to watch that. But, the progress is just so exciting. But one of the things that I was talking about in Costa Rica, and I kind of clarified in my mind, is right now there's a big debate about what's really happening in Washington and Europe with the regulation of AI and whether or not open source AI will be allowed to really propagate. And how throughout the history of tech in the last, 30 some odd years, open source has played a huge, huge role. I mean, there's a big element of data.world that is built on open source. When I took my last company public, Bazaar Voice, we, for the S1, had to detail all the open source that we used. And it was a very, very long list of open source. And there are really viable open source models emerging right now. It's very interesting to see Meta actually leading with Llama, their open source model, or this model Mistral. So there's all these fascinating open source models. But then there's these people going to Washington, almost kind of part of that moratorium call, right? Like, hey, you got to be really careful. We got to really regulate this, et cetera. And I think that it's hard to know like what's really happening there and get in their heads. But one of the things that I think really defines how much you can dream as an entrepreneur is how optimistic you are on humanity overall. And if you're optimistic on humanity, open source AI makes a lot of sense. If you're super pessimistic on humanity and you see everything as just like, oh my gosh, people are going to use all this technology for the worst possible things, it's going to, steal the 2024 election and blah, 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 blah. Then you might be more inclined to say, well, I actually want these superpowers from a platform perspective in the hands of a few. And I am one of those people that's very optimistic about humanity. Now, I also, again, as we mentioned earlier, program my brain to make sure that I am reading about all of the optimistic things actually happening with scientific breakthroughs and the rest. And so I am wiring my brain more for that. And it's not like I avoid the negative. I mean, the negative is constantly pushed at me. I mean, sometimes I get overwhelmed with the negative and go into a little bit of a funk. I'm not saying I'm perfect at all with this, but I think it's really important to tend to what you are putting in your mind. And that what you're putting in your mind ultimately will lead to whatever output you create and whatever orientation you have about the future. And so this whole kind of, Bill Gurley's on a big, he moved to Austin recently, and he's on a big bent right now around, you've got to let open source AI thrive. And I very much agree with him on that. And so, and the regulations that we have on the books in terms of like theft and, if you're impersonating someone, libel, like these types of laws will apply to AI, whether it's open or closed. So we already have a lot of laws on the books. So I really think that it's something to, I mean, how do you think about that? When you think about like open source AI versus closed, are you fearful of open source AI? Are you optimistic about it? Like, do you want more of it?
Absolutely. Of
Yeah.
course, absolutely. I give a lot of speeches, as you know, and I try to do Q&A in all of them. And there are questions I get repeatedly. And one of them that comes up a lot is about the ability of one person. So here's what the question sounds like. Sure, back in the olden days, if you had a bad person, maybe they took a 6-shooter and they went in and shot 6 people. Now, you can have these tools and you can engineer smallpox and re-release it. And so you get this huge asymmetry where few bad actors, you empower them to do vastly more than they would have ever been able to do before. And that is the secret, not so secret, fear that a lot of people have, is not the widespread usage of these, but these extreme edge cases. And what I always say to it, because it seems so reasonable and so practical to say that, but what I always say to it, and I deeply believe it, is the ability to do asymmetric harm has been with us forever. One person could go and put a dead goat in the town well and poison everybody in the town.
Right.
You ruin the water supply for everybody. You've been able to release, you could go poison a town, even today you could go poison a town's water supply. And yet the reservoirs don't have, armed guards. You could spread botulism easily. You could, there are so many ways to do great harm, and have been for a long time. That and it doesn't happen. It hardly ever happens. And that just speaks pretty well of it. We can largely be trusted with all the caveats and buts. So no, I think we have waited, as you and I wrote in that article, 4 billion years for this moment. We
Right.
finally are bringing together all the disparate knowledge that humanity has accumulated in 5,000 years of written history. It's all scattered like in that last scene in the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie where they go put the Ark in that warehouse. That's the world of information we live in today. And ChatGPT is this moment. It's the first of these things that brings that together into one thing. And we should do everything. If knowledge is power, it is a power to do good, and to empower yourself. And so knowledge is never bad. Ignorance is never better than knowledge.
Yeah,
So
I
no,
completely agree.
I'm
People are terrified of the Gutenberg press when it first came out. That's going to mean the end of the control of knowledge. And look at where we're at as a result of it and the ubiquity of knowledge that we have instead.
yeah, they ran out of ancient works to reprint. And so they tried to come up with new and novel things to reprint. And that is how we got the word novel.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's how we got the word novels.
We need new. We need novel stuff to print. Why
Right.
not novels? So what a
Right.
novel was something that wasn't from antiquity, was something new.
That's cool.
So what I said in that talk you were referring to was, I quoted Ernest Hemingway. He said, the only way you can know whether you should trust somebody is to trust them. That's the only way you're ever going to find out. And the only
Right.
way we're going to know what these tools will do is by using them. not by being afraid of them and but by using them and embracing them and believing in ourselves. In the Agora book, I write about how for humanity went through some times where we got down to just a few hundred mating pairs, and if you look at how did we survive, it wasn't through utilitarianism. We still kept the old and the feeble alive and part of the group, and we didn't put them out to die. We did it by staying together, and that is what ultimately speaks well of us. But when the chips were down back then, when our very survival was at stake, we hung together, and we have not changed since that moment. So
Yeah.
people can say that's overly optimistic, but I think it's historical fact.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that it's not just an element of faith, right? It's a element of historical fact, because we're all standing on the shoulders of many, many giants that got us to this moment in history. And we're all building on top of each other's knowledge. And that's, of course, one of the main aspects of your book, We Are Agora. And there's a tremendous amount of beauty in that. And, you go back to Homo sapiens, for example, by Yuval Noah Harari, and the fact that we're such good storytellers and invented language and, allowed ourselves to propagate through the belief in stories. And some stories are better than other stories. There's like some stories in the world right now, which are dangerous stories. But, overall, like, we want a lot of the same things as human beings, and doesn't mean there are very trying times and very, very tough periods in history that we have to navigate through. And, we're not perfect, but overall, like, we muddle our way through it and figure it out and advance. And we're advancing at a pretty incredible pace right now. I do think that, to the social media point, that is an area where it is still very new, and we really do need to be very mindful of how to actually train people to deal with it. One of the neat things that, my daughter is now in college, and in her first semester, she took a class called Self-Care and Resilience. Her first semester. It wasn't a required course. It's an elective. But something like that should be actually required, I think. There should be courses, remember the courses, I'm sure you took a course like this, Byron, when you were younger. I did, like on home economics. Did you ever take a home economics course?
I still have the red apron that I made my mother.
Okay.
It's the one thing, like, out of when she passed, that I got.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's some real mega trends, right? I mean, we know that people are, a lot of people are very addicted to social. Levi, by the way, refuses to use social media because he doesn't want that addiction at all. Like, he instead chooses to fill his head with lots and lots of educational knowledge.
I don't use any of it.
Yeah, I use it.
Social media is only free if you value your time at zero. If
Yeah.
you don't value your time at zero, then it's incredibly expensive to use.
Yeah, I use it, and I'm an advocate for it, but I'm really careful with how I use it. And 90% of my social media time is actually spent on LinkedIn. I'm the CEO of a company. That's a very social role. Like, I'm dealing with lots of, great customers and partners, and a lot of them are on that network. And that network takes the tone of business much more than, people hiding behind a persona, like you said, and trying to attack on a political vector or things like that. So it's a much, much happier social place. But what I was getting to is, like, just like we had home economics courses when we were growing up, there really should be courses on managing your life. And it is true that people are struggling more and more with things like constantly comparing themselves to other, and, depression. And I'm talking about, by people, I'm talking about primarily teenagers now that are growing up in the social media age. And there should be required courses to deal with that. And
Yeah, I mean,
that
there would be a lot. There would be a lot. Like, a class on critical thinking is probably more
Yeah.
important than Algebra 2 for most people.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe you don't need geometry and trig. You might not, but you do
Right.
need to know how to spot a logical fallacy.
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
Yeah.
As you know,
Why did you? Yeah.
we
You
homeschooled 4
homeschool.
kids. Yeah, so I gave it a lot of thought. And in
Oh, yeah.
retrospect, maybe we should have put one like in public school, like a control, so we could
Right.
see what worked out better. But I've given it a lot of thought because then, my wife and I had to think, well, what is important to learn?
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
and one big thing that's important to learn is what are you passionate about?
Yeah.
That's the real thing. But
I
I
got
mean,
to
I read
work
about
with one of your sons, and if he's an example of the product of homeschooling. He's quite an
well,
amazing.
we'll see. They had an extraordinary mother. I will say that, and I don't want to dump on public school because I'm a huge advocate of it. But I will say, and I wrote about this in the Agora book, it is an institution designed in the Industrial Revolution to make factory workers, and it itself was modeled after a factory. So it tries to manufacture workers. And when you manufacture something, any deviation is considered an error. So even if you make it better in a manufacturing world, that's a defect because the goal is to make everything identical in manufacturing. And so the goal was to make an identical set of people and to work in factories. And I think it does that very well. But that isn't what you need as many of now. But Brett, I have used more of your time than I would be entitled to. So, and we didn't even hardly get started. I have a page of things we didn't get to. So we'll have to do this again.
Yeah, I would love to do it again, and we can address all different types of topics. But yeah,
All right.
Thanks so much for being a great friend, and everybody really should read your book, We Are Agora. It's a beautiful read, and really the type of very optimistic read about the power of humanity that hopefully people will choose to put into their brain here at the beginning of 2024. It's a type of book that people should choose to read versus just the 24/7 negative barrage pushed at them, which feel like body blows if you don't try to counter it in some ways.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being on the show.
If you like what you heard today, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe so that more folks like you can become a part of the Agora. Visit ByronReese.com for more information about each episode and to learn about Byron's forthcoming book, We Are Agora.